episode of Sylvia Knit Stuff. My name is Sylvia, I'm 35 years old, I live right outside of Paris, France, and I'm coming to you today with a standard knitting podcast. But before we get into that, I just want to say if you want to find me on Instagram or on Ravelry, my username on both of those is SylvieRar. It'll be right here at the bottom of the screen, and I will also link to both of them in the description box below. With that said, let's jump into the nitty-gritty. Haha. Starting with finished objects. As you can see, my Halu, how do you pronounce it? I don't know, is done. I don't really want to get into this all that much. I think I was pretty far along last time and I showed it to you guys in my last 3 podcasts, if I remember correctly. So yeah, just do a quick basic. I knit a size large. I'm not sure if I'm totally on gauge or not, but I don't think I'm too far off. I knit this in yarn from Lain'amourée, a French yarn dyer who does lots of really nice tonals. I used her silk mohair and her 100% merino fingering. And both of those were in the Se promener en forêt, so walking in the forest, colorway. I knit all of the lengths kind of in line with the pattern. I knit the sleeves to however long she said to knit them. I knit the body to however long she said to knit them. And it didn't grow a whole lot with blocking. But I didn't stretch out the sleeves or the body. I also didn't want to stretch out the neckline because I was scared it would become too open and too folly-offy, the shouldery, which is kind of happening. I might put some elastic in there if it gets too wide in future. But yeah, it has this lovely lace here with this really cool V neckline. And then some lace at the cuffs as well. Though in this slightly darker color, it's kind of hard to show it to you guys. I did realize, though, that I did make a mistake. Here at the top, you start knitting just some regular stockinette, and there's a rolled hem before the ribbing. And you're actually supposed to do the same thing on the cuffs and on the body, and I did both of the sleeves. I was just like, yep, I'm done with the ribbing, just gonna do an Italian bind off. It's gonna look nice. And then when I was knitting the body, or no, did I finish the body first? I don't know. I finished one and then the other, and I hadn't read the instructions properly. Classic Sylvia move, huh? And I realized that I was supposed to have done that rolled hem on the body and on the sleeves too, but I had already done the body or the sleeves or whatever, and I did not do a rolled hem. And plus, I have more elasticity in my bind off because I did an Italian bind off than if I would have done like a normal bind off. And Jenny's surprisingly stretchy just doesn't look as good, so that's all right. I'm okay with my mistake here. Another thing that I've noticed, so I haven't knit that many projects with mohair. I knit a rocket tee with drops mohair, and I find that mohair kind of itchy. I knit my, what's it called, jelly cube cardigan with the Wandering Flock mohair, and I find that mohair is super soft and delightful. I knit sweater number, I think 13, with Knitting for Olive mohair, and I find that mohair very soft and delightful. And I think, I put a mohair border on a shawl too, and I find it kind of like, it's a guépard garn, and I find it kind of like, kind of on the line between kind of scratchy and kind of okay. And this mohair, I do find it a little bit scratchy. So I think I'm a little bit sensitive to mohair. I'm not breaking out in hives, I'm not allergic, but it just reminds me of like being a kid and sometimes getting some specific socks or sweaters and finding them itchy and kind of unbearable to wear. I can wear this and I'm not wearing it with anything underneath and I'm okay, but I do kind of feel the mohair. If I wear a tank top or something, I mean, I've worn it a couple times and I've been okay. But if it gets a little too hot and sweaty, then it becomes really uncomfortable. So, yeah. I don't think I really have anything else to go over for this. I'm happy with it, though with my whole mohair, I guess, not sensitivity because it's not an allergy, but itchativity. I actually have another sweater quantity of these 2 yarns that I wanted to use in the Usagi sweater by Disyarning, and that has an intarsia part all up in the top. So the top, it has like a V, not a cutout, but there's like a V shape here, and this is all knit in I think a single strand of mohair. And it's made me think, like, do I really want to knit that with that mohair? Like, I'm considering, what if I just sell that mohair and then buy some knitting for olive, because I know that I don't have any issues with the knitting for olive mohair because I knit it in my other sweater and I find it much softer and more comfortable to wear. I don't know. All right, let's move on to finished object number 2. So last time I talked to you guys, I did have this on the needles as well, and it is also done. So this is a little Sophie Scarf, which is a pattern by Petite Knit. And I said it before, I don't have the Sophie Scarf pattern, but I have the shawl pattern, and I saw somewhere the increase speed for the scarf. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna kind of freestyle it using this shawl pattern and make it work. And so this is yarn from the Wandering Flock. This is the colorway Aimee's Peaches and Dreams, which is like a very light peach base with almost like holographic pastel. I feel like it pools really cool here, and you can really see the holographic-y effect. And I used most of the skein. I had, I think, 109 grams in the skein, so it was quite a generous skein. You know, it says 100 grams, but it's 109. And I knit until I think I had 50 something. I wanted to knit until I had half, but I think I wouldn't have been able to with the pattern wrap. I think I would have gone, maybe I might have not had enough if I tried to knit one more pattern rep at the point that I started decreasing. And so I do have a tiny bit left, but just only like 4 or 5 grams, I think. So I did use most of it. And I bought this yarn at the pop-up shop that La Bien-Aimée did in April. Talked about it last time. And it was my first time touching the baby Paca from the Wandering Flock. And it's just so nice and squishy and not scratchy. It is a kind of heavy fingering sport base, and it's a mix of baby alpaca, superwash merino, and nylon. So it's got a little bit of fuzzy, a little bit of halo, as you can see. And when I bought it, I was like, I want this around my neck. I had a moment where I almost was like, should I keep going? Should I frog this? Is this going to be just long and weird? And it is a little bit long, but I can wear it a couple different ways if I want to. So I can do like one, I think the tip is, it's kind of hard to see the tip because it's not a very pointy thing, but I can kind of wrap it around like this. Wrap it around kind of like that. We're not doing the best job here, guys. Especially in like the camera like that. But I can do this, you know, and it's super soft, super comfortable, and I think it looks pretty cute. Give it a couple wraps, keep the neck warm. I like it. And as I said, I didn't really use the Sophie Scarf pattern exactly, and I also didn't use the 3.5 millimeter needles. I did use 4 millimeters on this, and yeah, pretty happy with it. I can maybe keep her on for now. And as opposed to the mohair, like this alpaca, the fuzzy alpaca-ness, I don't find it itchy at all. And then I have one more finished object that was also a whip last time. Ta-da! My Mermaid Avenue socks. So these are the Mermaid Avenue socks by Summerly Knits. And I think this pattern is really cute. Knit it before, gave them to my mom. And then I had this sock set from Artemis Yarns from the Aquatic Summer collection. And as I said, you know, I think it would be perfect. Aquatic Summer, Mermaid Avenue, the colors, the vibe. I think it works really, really well. So I'm not sure what this stitch pattern is called, but I have seen it on a couple different patterns. So it's not something that just came out of Summerlee's brain. It's a 12-row repeat, and it involves slipping 3 stitches with the yarn in the front, and then you knit the next round, and then you go on like that. You do 2 rounds where you have these slip stitches with these bars, and later you knit them together to create that texture, which I think looks pretty cool. At first I was a little bit worried that the yarn had a little bit too much tonal variegation for this stitch pattern, but I think you can see it well enough, and I think it came out pretty cute. I did a heel flap and gusset. I did change the ribbing on top. I did more than she said, and I did it twisted. And then I didn't do the stitch pattern on the feet. I went down to 60 stitches on the feet and just did them in stockinette, so you get a little bit more of this kind of like micro striping pooling effect. And I don't know if I mentioned the colors. I've said them in my previous podcast, but it's the Artemis yarn sock yarn, and the main color is Deep Sea, and this color is Chlorophus. I haven't blocked these yet, but I just wore them a couple times after finishing them, so they're kind of blocked by my feet. So, you know, they're kind of more flattened out. The stitch pattern has spread out a little bit, and I did do 60 rounds on the leg, but because it is a slip stitch pattern, it's not as tall of a leg as like a 60 round stockinette leg on a sock. Okay, now let's move on to Whip City. So I've got a couple of whips, and I think last time there was one whip that I showed you that I have since frogged, and one whip that I showed you 2 episodes ago that I frogged and then completely restarted. But other than that, we've got a couple new cast-ons. And I also, after the whip section, want to talk to you about my 2 upcoming cast-ons, because once I get 1 or 2 things finished, I'm going to cast on these other projects for sure. I think I didn't mention it last time, but I wanted to knit, because last time, I don't know if you guys saw it, if you remember, I had a filming issue where I had paused the filming. I thought I had hit record again and it didn't film, and so I kind of filmed the second part of my podcast faster, and I think I didn't repeat some of the things that I had said before because I was tired and my voice was giving out. So I may have talked about this in the part that didn't get filmed. But I have this advent calendar. I'll put a picture of like all the mini skeins so you can see how it looked before I started working with it. It's a half advent calendar from a Dutch yarn dyer who goes by Wolbeest. I think that's how you pronounce it. I wanted to knit a striped fingering weight sweater in that advent calendar. My idea was just to stripe all the colors once and do kind of a fade from dark to light. However, the colors, I think they don't make a perfect fade. Like some go a little bit more red, some go a little bit more blue, and there's no way to completely align them, so they just go in like dark to light, I think, perfectly. If you look at the picture that I took of the original fade, that was the order that they were in when I received them, so like from 1 to 12. And then I decided to change it up a little bit because I was like, maybe I can do a slightly better job. I'm not sure I did, because I think some of the stripes aren't lighter than the one before, but we're making it work, y'all. So what I did, instead of picking a pattern and then trying to make my gauge work for that pattern, was that I knit a swatch with the main color. So it was 12 mini skeins and 1 100-gram skein. And the colors don't have names or anything, so it was just from the 2022 purple advent calendar. And so this is the main color. And I knit a swatch on 3.5 millimeter needles. I used my unicorn interchangeables because they're pretty nice for knitting stockinette. But I have struggled with them a little bit on this project. We'll get into that in a bit. And so I just knit this little swatch in the round, washed it, blocked it, laid it flat to dry, didn't pin it, and then I measured it. And so I had a gauge of 24 stitches and 30 rows. So what I did with that is I went into the Ravelry pattern search did a search with all of my criteria. So if you don't know, Ravelry has an advanced search function. There's the sidebar where you can check all of your little options, but you can also type things into the search bar. So if you want to look only for raglan patterns, you don't necessarily have to go into the construction or attribute section. You can just type in raglan into the search bar and you'll see it'll pop up on the bottom and you can just click on it directly. So I went in there and I typed fingering weight, light fingering weight, raglan construction, because I wanted just simple top down. And then I put in my gauge. And so my stitch gauge was 24 and I just searched by stitch gauge. And I had a couple options that I was considering. So first there was Nadia Crétin-Léchenne, who is a Swiss designer. She designed a striped sweater called the Wannabe. Then there was Audrey Borrego, who is also, not also because she's French, but French speaking. She's a French designer and she has a stripy raglan called the Elanide. And then there was also Jessie May's Cozy Classic Raglan Light that had a similar gauge. So all three of these kind of fit my gauge. I think all three of them were 24 stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And then I kind of decided based on the raglan details and the neckline. So I discarded the Cozy Classic Light pretty quickly because it had more of a boat neck. And after my experience with the elf mail, I didn't really want anything too boat necky. And then I was looking at the neckline of the Wannabe and of the Elanide and comparing, looking up to where the short rows went, which one seemed a bit rounder, and looking at the different project pictures too. And I ended up going with the Wannabe. I think the fit around the neck looked pretty similar. I was like zooming into the short rows and everything. And I went for the Wannabe because I do like the raglan detail. And I also looked afterwards at the row gauge. The row gauge for the Wannabe is 32. My row gauge on this was 30. So if my actual project is the same gauge as my swatch, the raglan might be just the tiniest bit deeper, but that's not a big deal to me. So yeah, that was my whole process for this project. So I haven't touched this project in I think about a week. I've kind of lost steam on it a little bit. I don't know, I'm not feeling sweater knitting that much right now, but this is how it looks so far. I did do a few things different from the pattern. The pattern has you cast on and go straight into the ribbing. I decided I wanted to try to give it a little bit more structure because it is quite a lightweight fingering yarn, and the yarn that she uses is, I think, Mondim from Heterosalia Rosa Pomar, and that's a non-superwash, and so I'm using a lighter weight superwash yarn. So I'm hoping that that will stop the collar from stretching out as much. Though later I did read a thread on Reddit saying it's not necessarily the fact that you pick up the collar later that is going to stop it from stretching out. It's just the construction, because a raglan, everything comes from the neck. So the whole thing is pulling at that neck. Can always put elastic in later. But I also kind of wanted to do that because I wanted to do an Italian bind off, or I was debating, do I do one layer and an Italian bind off, or do I do a folded collar? But then I also decided against the folded collar because it's such a thin fabric that I didn't want the extra bulk at the top. And I did, so I'm using 3.5 millimeter needles for the body, and I decided to use 2.5 for the ribbing. I also knit the ribbing inside out, but I think because I use such a tight gauge, there isn't a massive difference between the inside out and between the inside and the outside. Maybe it's just, here you can see, here's the wrong side, here's the right side. And as I mentioned, I kind of reordered the skeins, and it's hard to tell from the skein how it's going to look like knit up. To me, for example, the color that I put on the top in the skein, it looked darker than the color beneath. But I think the color I put beneath it almost looks darker. Even here, I think you can kind of see it. And yeah, as I said, like some of the colors have more blue, some have more red. And I'm not sure it's going to be a perfect fade, but it's still going to go from mainly darker. My chair is so squeaky. It's going to go mainly from darker colors to lighter colors. And I also changed the striping rhythm because I wanted one stripe of each color. So with my row gauge, I did some math. I measured a couple other sweaters that I've knit, measured the length. I'm like, okay, this length is okay if I get something about this length. I calculated, okay, if I want something this length, how many rows does it need to be to get this length? Then how many, like if I want to have 12 stripes, how many rows per stripe do I have to do to get the right length, basically? And to get the length that I needed, I calculated that I needed about 10 rows per each of those 12 colors. But then I decided to take some inspiration from the Wannabe pattern because she does 6 row stripes, but then she has 2 row stripes of the main color between each color. And I think I like the idea of breaking up those colors more than doing kind of like a brutal transition from one to the other if it doesn't fade completely perfectly, because I find that that can sometimes look a little bit messy. However, I did say I've been having a little bit of trouble with these needles. I have talked about these before, I believe. And so this is the Unicorn interchangeable set from Addie. And they are much slicker than my ChowGoo needles. They have a white bronze coating. And so for knitting stockinette, they're really nice, really smooth, really fast. But they do have at the join where you join the cable and the needle, they have a step, right? So they've got this step because it's a click system. It's not a twist system like ChowGoo or Knit Pro, which is Knitter's Pride in Europe, and those other brands. So you do have a bit more of a step here. As long as you're not knitting too tight, you're usually okay. And I think I knit this watch and I was fine. But then when I got into knitting the project, there was times where I would feel the yarn kind of catching here. I think because also this is such a fine yarn, like the finer the yarn, the easier I think it catches on joins and stuff like that. I've even had, I was knitting something on ChowGoo's, and it was a pretty fine yarn, and even that was kind of getting caught at that joint. So this, I think I got into it, I started knitting a little bit tighter than I did on the swatch maybe, and I've noticed that my stitches started catching. So then I forced myself to loosen up a little bit, and I do have some areas where the tension looks a bit uneven. Hopefully blocking will kind of fix that up. I don't know how well you can see the unevenness in the tension, but also I said that I picked this pattern because I really like the raglan line. Let me show it to you guys. So there's 5 stitches between the raglan increases. So there were 2 things that I was kind of just like, huh? When I when I read the pattern. 2 little things that made me kind of go, that's maybe not how I would have done it, but okay. First of all, the German short rows, I was a little bit confused by the way it was written. Maybe because she's Swiss and maybe, you know, there was a bit of a translation thing. I don't know who translates her patterns, if she does it herself. Like I find sometimes in patterns written in English by non-native English speakers, sometimes things are described a little bit differently than how you would see it in patterns written by English speakers. Or maybe it's just a formulation that I'd never seen used before, but that is used by other pattern writers. I don't know. But I've knit a handful of raglans. I've knit a handful of sweaters with German short rows, and I had never seen the instructions kind of like explained the way that she did. Usually when you knit German short rows in all the patterns that I've knit, it'll say knit this amount and then turn and make your double stitch and keep knitting. That's generally how I've seen German short rows explained, described in a pattern. This one was a little bit different. She would just say knit X, knit this many stitches, and then turn on the next stitch or something like that. And I did what seemed logical to me, but I was like, maybe that's not right, but I think I'm okay. Was, you know, I'd knit however many she said to knit, and then I knit 1 more. Then I turned and I used that stitch to make the double stitch. But my neckline looks okay, so I think I kind of tried to compare to hers, and I think it looks okay. I think it looks nice. I have not tried this on yet. And there was also, I think, one other thing that wasn't like a language thing. It was more of just like a methodology thing. So these raglan stitches, there are 5 raglan stitches. And instead of placing markers before and after the 5 stitches, she has you place a marker in the middle. And then it's just like knit 2-3 stitches before the marker and then do your increase, knit 2 stitches after the marker and do your increase. So it's a little less brainless. You can't just knit without thinking or looking, because you need to be on the lookout that you don't by mistake knit past where you have to do your increase. But I'm just doing it as she said. I cast on a size large or a size 3. They're numbered sizes. And I don't remember how much ease that should give me. I don't think a huge amount. But I think it'll be nice when it's done. And hopefully we'll be farther along next time. But I've got a bunch of other projects kind of on the go, and let's have a look at them. So lately, I'm like all about the frogging. As I said, I had a project that you saw last time that I frogged. I had a project that you saw 2 episodes ago that I frogged. And now I have a project that I want to show you guys because I want to frog it. So I have the 52 Weeks of Socks book, volume 2. And I frogged my Sorbetto shawl that I was knitting. I showed it to you guys 2 episodes ago. And I had it a dark purple and this kind of like murky variegated green with Stellina. And I wasn't feeling the color combo. I was making some mistakes, and I'll get into that a little bit more later when I show you the other one. So I decided to frog it, and I was like, okay, since this yarn is already caked up, let's put it in something. Let's make some socks. I had finished my Mermaid Avenue socks, and I picked up this book, and I was like, let's see if I can find something cool with 1 color of fingering weight yarn that is not super complicated, that I can easily knit on the go. I found this pattern, the Hexie Diamond Socks by Nancy Wheeler. And, you know, I love geometric patterns, and I saw this pattern and thought, oh, that looks really cool. Let's try it. And this is the yarn. So this yarn is from a French dyer called Vulcan yarn. It was her 100-gram skein from her 2022 advent calendar, and the theme was kind of Aurora Borealis, so there are lots of greens and purples and pinks and that kind of color. And I started these socks. And so I knit the ribbing to pattern for once. And here are the socks, but I think I'm gonna frog them for, I guess, kind of 2 similar interconnected reasons. I made a couple mistakes in the cable pattern because these are what are they called? Slipped crosses. They're slipped crosses where you like slip 1 stitch, you knit another, and you cross them. And there are a few places where I totally crossed them in the wrong direction, and so the kind of even line got messed up. Right here, for example, I think is one of the places that I messed up. And it happened in a couple other places, and I know it's not a big deal. I know it's not highly visible, but I think once I start something and I start making a bunch of mistakes, it kind of puts me off the project, like with the Sorbetto shawl, right? Maybe this yarn is just cursed. And also, so I did not want to knit these slip crosses with a cable needle because you repeat the chart, I think 7 times around the leg on the smallest size, and you have to do the right and left slip cross once every repeat, every other row, right? So you're doing a lot of these slipped crosses. So I looked up how to do them without a cable needle, and I can do it. I did it, but I just don't really enjoy the manipulation and the feeling that you have to do. So between just not really enjoying doing the stitch pattern and having made mistakes, it's put me off this a bit. So I am going to frog, I think, up to the ribbing and maybe go for a simple vanilla sock or something with a really simple, truly brainless pattern. Even though it does look really cool, but I just know I'm not feeling it. you know, maybe I'll come back to this pattern later. I have the book. It's not going anywhere. We can always come back to it, but I'm not really feeling it right now. Since I took that yarn from my Sorbetto shawl, let's have a look at that one next. Ta-da! So this is a Sorbetto. It's also a pattern by Nadia Crétin-Léchenne. Same Swiss designer as the raglan sweater I showed you guys. And this is an asymmetrical, I think, kite-shaped shawl is what it's called. And I was originally knitting it with this dark purple and with the green that I showed you, but now I am using the dark purple, which is from Prue, Punk Rock Unicorn. So it's her sock yarn, and the colorway is called Amethyst. 85% superwash merino, 15% nylon. It's nice and squishy. And I had originally considered casting this on with this contrast color. But then I got there and I was like, oh, maybe I can change it up, use something slightly different than what I would usually do, and go for this green. And I did a poll on my Instagram, and more people voted for the green and purple combination, even though I think it wasn't what I was initially attracted to. And I made a couple mistakes in the lace. I think I may have talked about it last time because I had started the lace. I was a couple rows in. And it's a very simple lace pattern. I think it's called Feather and Fan, which creates these really cool, like undulated looking rows. And yes, it's lacy, but I think it's also got like a really big graphic impact with that waviness. It's not something overly delicate or anything like that. And what happened was I didn't place any stitch markers. I was just like, let's do it. This is a simple lace. Everyone I've seen talk about it say it's really easy. And I guess didn't take into account my inattentive brain. And I just tend to sometimes lose focus. I make mistakes. It comes with being me. I have ADHD. And so I kept making mistakes in this really simple lace. This time I decided, okay, we're going to place stitch markers and we're going to knit very carefully. And when I was in this part, I was even just like counting after every increase, making sure I had the right stitch count because I didn't want to mess that up. Because I think at one point, after just one of the plain garter stitch sections, I had the wrong stitch count. So I was like, okay, we're gonna make sure everything is right as we go along. And I had one little slip up with my stitch count in the garter section where I stopped counting for a few rows. Shocker, shocker. But other than that, like the lace went really well. I finished the first chart already. There are 2 charts. So I think I have some garter and some stripes after this, but I haven't touched this in a week because I have a test knit that is on a deadline that I'll show you guys after. But yeah, second time was the charm. Like I like the color combination so much more. It's been so much nicer to knit because of the stitch markers. I just need structure. I need format. I need that to knit this kind of thing. And it kind of reminds me of yoga because I do yoga and a lot of the time we have blocks. And when I started doing yoga, I mean, I've been doing yoga on and off for a long time, but I've gotten into it a lot more seriously in the past year. And it's always like, I can do whatever. I don't need to use a block. I don't need assistance. And I think the more you go along with knitting, with yoga, it is okay to use the tools that you need, and it doesn't make you any better or any worse at what you're doing. You're just making it work better for you. Oh, and I don't think I mentioned what my contrast color was, but it is from La Bien-Aimée. It's her sock yarn in the colorway Andromeda. It's got gray and pink and purple. Yeah, I just need to accept that I'm a purple gal, you know? It just makes me much happier than other colors. And if most of my projects are going to be purple, then that's not a problem. Though, look, these, not purple, not purple. I do change it up sometimes. As I said, the Wannabe and the Sorbetto, I have not been working on them that much lately because I have been knitting a test knit that has been taking up most of my time because I want to make sure that I finish it. And the rows are getting really, really long at this point. I am currently testing the Fairycore Shawl for Fran Lopez, and it is a technically 4-color shawl. I need to figure out my 4th color still because it's just in kind of details that you add at the very end. And it is a shawl with mohair and merino stripes. It has like little cute ruffle details and other details that are added later on. It's a half pie shawl, so it's a semicircle. And the lace sections are knit in mohair. And it has cable sections that are knit in merino. And I think it's really pretty. I wasn't originally going to apply to test it. I had seen, I was like, oh, it's a really pretty shawl, but I don't know if I would be able to do that. It looks kind of complicated. I did test knit a sweater pattern of hers last year called the Sweetheart Sweater, which is also cables and lace and seed stitch. And like, I do like her aesthetic. I don't like everything she designs. Some of it is a little bit too delicate for me, and this was almost on that level, but I think the cables, I like the little like ruffly bit. I like the cables, and with the 4th color, we actually put like a ribbon. It's a ribbon yarn, a tape yarn, and you run that tape yarn through these yarn overs to make a little corset, and you tie a bow. And I think that was so cute. But I was almost like, oh, I don't know how much I feel the lace, but I really like the other elements, and I am enjoying the lace. And so the yarn that I'm using, I did have a whole dilemma. Like, I tend to apply for tests, think, I will use this yarn that I have, and then I start swatching or I start working with it, and I'm just like, I don't like this. So I had another one of those dilemmas, and I ended up ordering all new yarn. This yarn is all from La Bien-Aimée, and I got it from her Happy Accident section because it's a little bit cheaper. And so I'm using this kind of light purple color, but this is the Sport Nouveau base, which is a sport non-superwash 100% merino, and it's 300 meters per 100 grams. And then this is his Sport Nouveau, and then this is her Sport, which is a little bit thinner and it's superwash. And this is also in a Happy Accident color. And so this is like a kind of like beigey color here. And then this is also the Happy Accident, and this is just a nice little light pink. And this actually starts, I had to learn a brand new cast-on for this. It's the pinhole cast-on. It's like a magic circle in crochet, basically. And it, at first I was like, ooh, that looks complicated. And then I tried it and I was like, that was actually really easy. You know, always try new things. Don't be scared to try new things. What's the worst that could happen? You know, you have to frog it. And so pinhole cast on, and you start doing some little increases with yarn overs. And then you do this technique, which she also used in the Sweetheart Sweater, where you do an I-cord, but you don't completely bind off. And so you still have stitches here, and they become like these elongated stitches. Up, and then just a little bit of plain stockinette, I think, to get it into the right size. And then the lace started. So this is 2 strands of La Bien-Aimée mohair, which is thinner than most other mohairs. You get 500 meters per 50 grams. And it matches the meterage of the mohair that she used. She did send a message at one point saying, some of my testers have found that their mohair is a lot fluffier than mine and they could get away with using 1 strand. And the yarn that I had originally started working with was a very fluffy mohair, and it definitely didn't have the same kind of stitch definition. It looked a little bit more fuzzy and diffuse than this is looking. So I am glad that I changed my colors. I like how this color palette is looking. And once again, you know, I was like, oh my God, am I going to mess up all the lace? Is everything going to be okay? Put in stitch markers, check off every row on my chart. And yeah, if I make a mistake on a repeat, I can easily go back and fix it because, you know, I have my stitch markers in place so I can see it right away. So yeah, look at me, knitting more complicated lace. And then cables. And so I'm in this second stripe with cables here. After that, I think there's 1 more lace mohair section and 1 more merino section. But the rows are starting to get really, really long. Like even I think up to this point, I could get through a row pretty quickly. And now, you know, you double your stitch count. You double your stitch count about here. You almost double it about here. And yeah, I've got a lot of stitches on the needles. And doing 1 row can take me like 40 minutes. because you're often cabling, and then on the back you're mainly purling across, so I'm not as fast of a purler as a knitter. I think I'm a little bit off gauge. I think I am a bit looser of a knitter than Fran, but I figured, you know, it's a shawl and it doesn't really matter that much if it's a little bit bigger than it's expected. And I also had a lot of extra yarn. I had a lot more meterage than what she recommended in the pattern for all 3 of my yarns. So yeah, I still need to figure out what yarn I'm going to use for my little corsets and bows here. You also use it, I think you take a crochet hook and you do a little chain in some sections to create almost like a little lateral looking braid. And you also use it, or no, you use this 3rd color here to make some baubles, because here we're doing some cables right here. So there's some like standard basic cables, and here there's cables that you cable them in a different direction every time, so it creates like this kind of undulating shape, and we later do crochet baubles in here with this color. So I really liked all the textural elements, the bow, and yeah, these 2 projects are reconciling me with lace, even though I don't necessarily want to wear a bunch of lace in my clothes or like very complex girly lace like this. Like doing it on a shawl from time to time is okay. So this has really been my main project for this past week. I cast it on, I think, a week and a half ago. Yeah, I cast it on the 4th of May. She gave us until the end of the month to finish it. It took me a little while to get started. The test started at the end of April because I had to wait for my new yarn to come in because my original combo wasn't working for me. Though she did say if you don't finish it in time, let me know. I can extend the testing window a little bit. And like with my sweetheart sweater, I didn't finish it in time, and it was fine, and she still picked me for this test. So I just see, it looks kind of like little hearts here. Oh, how cute. I just noticed that. I'm sure that's on purpose too. I'm getting a little warm. Take this off. I have one more whip to talk to you guys about, and then I have the 2 upcoming cast-ons to talk to you guys about. With spring on the horizon, I decided I wanted to start something in a summery plant fiber. And I was like, I want something kind of simple because I wasn't really feeling the Wannabe that much, and I wanted something simple to knit on when I wasn't working on either the Sorbetto or the Fairycore. And I decided to go for this cotton also because I was like, I've got a lot of purple going on. I wanted a different color, like a little bit of a palette cleanser. And so I decided to cast on this cotton. It doesn't look super even, but I find that ribbing in cotton really spreads out, stretches out, and becomes a lot more even after you wash it and wear it, in my experience. So it might look a little bit janky now, but it'll be okay. I believe so. And this is some yarn from Zostren Gren. It's a Danish chain. And they do this really soft organic cotton. It comes in these little bullet skeins, and you get 160 meters for 50 grams. So it's kind of like a heavy fingering sport-ish weight. And I wanted to make something that I would wear a lot. And I have the pattern for My Little Secret Crop by Jessie May. I have knit 2 of them in DK weight merino yarns, and I wear them at home all the time. So I decided I wanted to do a more summery version that I could wear when it got hotter out. Since this yarn is thinner than a DK, obviously, though she does say you can knit it in a sport weight with the same needle size, I decided to size down 1 needle size. So instead of knitting this on I think 3.75, instead of knitting the body on 3.75s, I'm using 3.5s, and I'm knitting a size large. I have found that they do stretch out. So at one point I even considered casting on the medium. I was like, I think large with a smaller needle will be okay. And I think it'll be fine just to wear around the house. And I am going to extend it. All the 2 other ones that I knit, I did add length to them. I think I added 3.5 inches to the first, 3 to the second, because if not, it would just really be a boob top. So I'm kind of debating changing the straps, but I haven't totally decided. Also, I have no idea what this color is. There are a bunch of random numbers on the label, but none of them say color or dye lot. And I also bought this color a few years ago and it's not in store anymore, I think. And now let's move on to future cast-ons. Irene Lynn recently released up the pattern for the Kylie Pullover, and I loved it right away because it has two things that I really like. It has mesh lace and it has cables. Dun, 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 dun. So this is my swatch for it. Once again, I was originally thinking of doing this in a blurple, like almost this color, but a little bit darker in the same yarn that I have. But I decided, I was like, I've got 3 other purples on the needles. Let's go for this lovely mint color. And I swatched for it, but I'm waiting to cast it on. I'd maybe like to finish the My Little Secret crop first because I don't want to have too many distractions from the Fairycore shawl. I've basically just been alternating between the Fairycore and the My Little Secret crop. Like when I'm tired and I want something brainless, I go for the My Little Secret crop, but most of the time I've been working on the Fairycore. But there is also a knit along going on in the French knitting world. And I'm a really big fan of Irene Lynn's patterns. I haven't knit any of them before, but a couple of them are in my queue or on my want to knit list. And quite a few people in the French knitosphere that I follow were just like, yes, this is, I think it was like a love at first sight for a lot of people. Laurie of Matsusagi and Marion Blackwood started a knit along for this. I already picked out my yarn, I swatched, I measured and everything, and I used the recommended needles to swatch. And my yarn is some Trubu. So it's a 100% bamboo rayon yarn. It's super drapey. I know it does tend to stretch out. And so you're getting it a little bluer. It's a lighter greenier color in person. It's really nice mint green. And this is a DK weight. It's 220 meters for 100 grams. And I have 2 of these skeins. So I have decided that I want to make the size 1. This is designed with a ton of positive ease. The size 1 is 122 centimeters, which is something like 50 inches, I think. So that's a lot of ease. I have 100 centimeter bust circumference. So I'm going to go for that size 1 because I know that the more I wear this, the more it will stretch out, even if I've got the right gauge blocked with the recommended needle. But I know that this yarn will probably continue to stretch out and grow as this thing lives and is worn. And also I'm doing the size 1 because I am probably going to run out of yarn. I only have 2 100-gram bullet skeins of this yarn. And I think the size 1 calls for 880 meters for the long sleeve version, because there's a long sleeve, there's a shorter sleeve version. And she says for the shorter sleeve version, you can remove 220 meters. And she uses the Lynn, however it's pronounced, by Sandnes Garn, which is, I think, classified as a worsted, but it has the same yardage as this. And I was like, okay, well, I have 2 skeins. I have 440 meters. I could probably crop it some more. And even the shorter sleeves, I'm not really a huge fan of how the shorter sleeves fall on the arm. So I did get the idea to do a flutter sleeve. I also have skeins of this yarn in a darker purple and in a lavender. So I also figured I can do it's not ribbing, there's like a trim I think that you apply afterwards to the neck and at the bottom, and I think I'm remembering correctly, you do a couple rows of stockinette and then a couple rows of garter and then you bind off. So worst comes to worst, I use this to knit the body. It's top down, so hopefully it should work for me. And do the trim in one of those purple colors. And then since I'm not a huge fan of how the sleeve falls in the short sleeve version, thinking of maybe doing a flutter sleeve like in her Faye top design, and just pick up those stitches and do some increases and then knit little flutters either in this color or another color if I run out. Fingers crossed that'll work. It's very rare that I'm playing a really bad game of yarn chicken. Sometimes it happens, but you know, we're gonna hope, we're gonna pray, we're gonna think it comes out okay. So you guys will probably see this in my next podcast, either started or done, depending on when I have the time to sit down and film. Then I also want to talk about one upcoming cast-on, because I said that one project that I showed you guys last time, I have since frogged. Last time I showed you guys the Chained Oblivion cardigan I cast on my birthday. And I had decided to use this yarn, which I had bought at La Fête de la Laine, which is a yarn festival right outside of Paris. And it's from La Fille au Renard. And I didn't swatch with it, and then it was my birthday, and I wanted to cast something on my birthday. So I decided to start the Chained Oblivion cardigan with this. Then I started having doubts. I went into them last time, not going to repeat myself, and decided that I would properly swatch with this and then re-swatch with the two other yarns that I originally swatched with. As a reminder, I was considering using Mondim from Bertozari Rosa Pomar and also Ulysse by De Rerum Natura. And I had originally swatched both of these on the recommended needles, which was 3.5. I did find the Mondim a little gappy, but thought it would be okay. And was like, this is a kind of rustic fingering weight. Maybe it'll behave kind of like the Mondim, but like once again, Sylvia acted impulsively. Sylvia did not think things through. And I realized, this is a 2-ply. This is not a merino, it's a French yarn breed called Bizet. And I find that this actually, I don't know if it's the 2-plyness of it, I don't think so. Maybe it's just the yarn itself, the way it's spun. It's almost like a cotton or another plant fiber in that it just doesn't seem to have a whole lot of elasticity. And I found myself not really enjoying working on it because of that kind of lack of elasticity. And it's also, I think, just too rustic for me. I'm finding this kind of thing a little bit itchy, and even the yak and silk in my elf mail, I found that a little bit itchy. And even though this is for a cardigan, I just don't know if I would be able to wear this and be comfortable, because it is quite scratchy to work with, and I found the feeling of it running around my finger, as I tensioned it, I just didn't really enjoy the experience of working with it. So I think I might destash this, because I have 400 grams of it, like 1,600 meters. Anyway, but then because I was having all of these doubts, I decided to swatch properly. I wanted to swatch a little bit of seed stitch and a little bit of cables, because I was worried it wouldn't look well, because this yarn is so different from the yarn that the pattern recommends. The problem is that Kelsey, the designer, has death grip syndrome. She knits super, super tight. I do not. The gauge, it's a pretty tight gauge, and she knit it in a DK weight. And I'm just like, I will never hit that gauge with a DK weight, which is why I was looking at more rustic fingering weights, or even maybe a sport weight. And yeah, so I swatched with that. Here's the cable pattern and a little bit of seed stitch. I know it's a little bit of a dinky, rinky swatch. And I was also lazy, and I don't think I blocked this swatch. So it would probably look a little bit different once blocked. But you can see, I don't know how well you can see it on camera, but this cable looks a lot flatter than the Mondim, because the 4-ply looks better in cables than 2-ply. I also find that the seed stitch looked a little gappier and holier than with the Mondim. Maybe because the yarn itself just is a little bit more uneven. So I continued my swatch with the Mondim on the 3.25s. And I think the seed stitch looked a little bit better, looked a little bit more even, a little less gappy, and the cable definitely pops a little bit more. But I was thinking, I think I want that seed stitch to be a little bit more filled in anyway. So I think I scrapped my idea of using a fingering weight non-superwash yarn. Though really I should have blocked this to see how it looked blocked. Maybe it would look different. Maybe I should do that, but we're too late to do that anyway, because then I swatched some more with Ulysse from De Rerum Natura. And this is a sport weight, but it has an almost fingering weight yardage. It's super airy, super light, super soft, and it's a French merino yarn. I did totally mess up my cable here, though you can see it. And I did swatch the cable. I think it looks obviously I messed it up, but it looks like nice and 3D. The seed stitch looks a lot less gappy. And I did this little part, just a small swatch area here of the seed stitch. And then I compared the gauge to my swatch on the 3.5s, and it wasn't super different. So, and it's still a couple stitches per 4 inches away from the actual project's pattern swatch gauge. So what I decided was like, okay, I'm going to use Ulysse. I will swatch again on 3mm needles, and based on that gauge, I will choose my size, because I'm not going to try to force my gauge into the gauge that Kelsey did. I think the pattern says row gauge is super important. I didn't check my row gauge, but it's a raglan, it's a cardigan. You know, if the fit isn't 100% perfect, it's not like I'm knitting something that's supposed to be super fitted. I'm not too worried about it. And I also decided I wasn't going to use a color like this, because the original pattern is knit in a really dark gray, like anthracite kind of color. And I think one of the things that attracted me to it was like, I really liked the texture and the cables in that color. The color though is from an American dyer. I wasn't going to order, well already I wasn't going to use the DK weight, because I also didn't want it to be that heavy. Though I think it will be a bit heavy with this, obviously. But I just imagine like, oh my god, it uses, I think the size large uses 2,000 meters of DK or something. I was like, that is going to be so heavy. And so I decided to go for Ulysse, the French Merino, and order it in the colorway Fusain. Fusain, I think, is charcoal, like art charcoal I used to draw with. And I ordered 10 of these little skeins, and I think the color is really close to the original color. So I'm excited to cast this on, but once again, I gotta finish some things. But maybe next time you'll see it back on the needles again. It's not super wash, so I also thought it would be nice for the seed stitch and the cables. It's much softer and much springier than this, though. You get 185 meters per 50 grams, so it's very lofty. That's it for knitting today, but I also have one quick thing to show you. So I have this new little yarn bowl. I have a knitting friend, Jeanne, who got really into pottery last year, I think. And now she's even working at the pottery studio that she learned to make pottery. And she sent me a message. She's like, hey, I have some yarn bowls I made. Do you want one? And I was like, sure. So I have this lovely handmade yarn bowl to use on my projects now. Thanks, Jeanne. I don't think she watches these, but I'm happy about it. It's cute. Woo! Okay, we have gotten through everything. If you are still with me, if you made it to this point, and if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to like the video. If you are not subscribed, please do subscribe. And if you want to leave me a comment, it would be much appreciated. It's always nice to hear from you guys, to have a little bit of back and forth. And I also said that I have something else in the works. So this past week, I filmed a bunch of vlog style video clips where it's really like a day in my life, and I'm not going to film for the weekend. I just did the days of the week, and so I filmed throughout the day, and it's not just about knitting. It's kind of, you know, my life out and about, what I've done. So watch out for that. This podcast will go up before that, so it will come out after, but maybe in like a week or so, I think. Try to get it out with not too much time in between, so you can just get a peek at my life in France if you're interested in that, because sometimes it can be fun to see vlogs about people's life and how they live and what they do. Anyway, have a great day. Happy knitting. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment.